I am Dean of the Horace H. Rackham School of Graduate Studies, and I'm also the past chair of the Wallenberg Committee. I want to first acknowledge that those responsibilities and duties have been assumed by my colleague, Curry Larson, who's the Senior Associate Dean and will be before you next year. This is the 9th Wallenberg Lecture and Medal presentation, and this year we're pleased to honor the Honorable John Lewis, an outstanding citizen who has dedicated his life to the protection and preservation of human rights for all. Each Wallenberg Lecture is unique, not only in the background and life experiences, but also in the ways in which they have responded to life's challenges. All of the lectures are alike, however, in the vigor with which they have defended liberty and human rights for all, in the care they have given to the persecuted and the oppressed, and in the courage and the determination with which they have defended their beliefs. Selecting John Lewis as the 1999-2000 lecturer and medalist upholds the very high standards expected of the Wallenberg Lecture. We are honored, truly honored, to have him with us this evening. The University Wallenberg Endowment, which has come as part of our efforts to continue to remind us and this larger community about the importance of each individual and his or her capability of making a difference. That endowment also provides for the support of one or more outstanding graduate students who assist the committee with the preparation of the lecture. This year, there are 2 current fellows, John Calvert of the School of Natural Resources, and Sadi Vejas, a specialist in learning disabilities. I'd like both of them to stand at this point. Their able work has made this particular lecture possible, and in the future others will follow them and aid in both in helping us to understand and be reminded of the important work that we all can engage in terms of advancing human rights throughout the world. It is now my pleasure to present my distinguished colleague and Professor Emerita Irene Butter, a longstanding member of the Wallenberg Committee and a pivotal figure here at the University of Michigan in ensuring the continued success of the Wallenberg Lecture. She will provide an introduction to the program and provide some sense of history and background. Irene.
Good evening. Can you hear me? Honored guest, Congressman Lewis, President Bollinger, and Dean Lewis, and all my old friends. Welcome to the 9th University Wallenberg Lecture. A longer than usual interval has elapsed since we last came together for our annual Wallenberg celebration. Quite a few months went by before Congressman Lewis was able to fit us into his demanding schedule. But now we're very happy that he's here with us, and I assure you that the long wait for his visit is well worth it. Once more, the person chosen as medalist this year is a remarkable addition to previous Wallenberg lecturers. As you know, in selecting the Wallenberg medalist, the committee seeks outstanding humanitarians whose dedication and acts of courage resemble Wallenberg's own extraordinary values and accomplishments. Now, what are some of the parallels that can be drawn between these 2 remarkable figures? I will identify several. Both of these men, Congressman Lewis and Raoul Wallenberg, had a strong sense of mission, a mission that was pursued at all costs and that would not be abandoned, even under seemingly hopeless circumstances. It was this sense of mission which propelled Raoul Wallenberg to rescue Hungarian Jews from Nazi persecution during World War II. And the same sense of mission, Congressman Lewis was propelled to fight for civil and human rights in this country in the 1960s. Now, in addition, both of these men, living in turbulent times of history and faced by powerful, corrupt, militant adversaries, used moral integrity and nonviolent methods to pursue their respective missions. Both men also possessed steadfastness, the ability to sustain a fight which demanded total commitment and unbounded energy, even when victory remained elusive. It is remarkable that Congressman Lewis and Wallenberg came from very different backgrounds. One from a sharecropper family living in a poor section of Alabama, the other from a well-to-do, privileged family in Stockholm. And somehow the character of these two men was shaped in similar ways. Both became strong, courageous, highly principled, and compassionate individuals, acting in defiance against brutality and injustice. One more attribute of Congressman Lewis which makes him a remarkable human being should be noted, and that is his capacity for forgiveness. He forgave George Wallace, governor of Alabama during the 60s, and a militant segregationist who ordered his troops to disrupt and arrest peaceful marchers and freedom riders. In Lewis's own words, he said, "When I met George Wallace," and this was many years later, "I had to forgive him, because to do otherwise, to hate him, would only perpetuate the evil system that we sought to destroy." Now, don't we all wish it were true that Raoul Wallenberg also had had the opportunity to forgive his oppressors? And that leads me to tell the Wallenberg story, because each year on this occasion, we pay tribute, validate, and reaffirm Wallenberg's courageous and heroic leadership during World War II. Raoul Wallenberg was born in 1912 into one of Sweden's most prominent families, whose members included, besides bankers and financiers, bishops, diplomats, artists, and professors. Gustav Wallenberg, in the role of guardian to his fatherless grandson, because Raoul's father died before Raoul was born, chose the University of Michigan over Harvard for Raoul's advanced education. This choice was based on the grandfather's conviction that an institution with a diverse student population and opportunities to mingle with students from different walks of life would constitute the richest type of environment for learning. Accordingly, Wallenberg arrived in Ann Arbor in 1931 to study architecture on this campus. And in 1935, he completed his undergraduate degree with honors. After graduation, Wallenberg returned to Sweden to pursue a career in banking and finance, and later on employment in different parts of the world. He had positions in South Africa, Palestine, and several European countries. His first exposure to Nazi atrocities committed against the Jews took place in Haifa. There, he worked for a bank and witnessed the arrival of large groups of Jewish refugees who had been forced to leave their native countries. A few years later, he became the partner of a Hungarian Jew in a European trading company. This new position entailed frequent travels within Europe, and at that time he encountered many uprooted Jewish families. Wallenberg's wartime experiences, his citizenship of a neutral country, his family background, and other personal attributes qualified him to be appointed as a Swedish diplomat. In 1944, he was recruited by the United States War Refugee Board for a special assignment, namely to protect from execution the only substantial Jewish population still preserved in Europe, the Jews in Budapest. During a brief 6 months in Budapest, July 1944 to January 1945, Wallenberg made his mark on history, concentrating on the rescue of tens of thousands of Jews from Nazi execution. He acted with boldness, persistence, and enormous courage. His innovative tactics included devising false protective passports called Schutzpässe, and in arranging for safe houses, which were Swedish properties designated as shelters for Jews. Wallenberg is said to have performed this rescue operation almost single-handedly, thus providing a supreme example that no matter how formidable the odds, one person can make a difference. In January of 1945, Wallenberg was arrested by the Soviets to be imprisoned in Russia, never to see the free world again. And isn't it ironic that no one ever succeeded in rescuing the man who had rescued so many from Nazi oppression? Wallenberg's example over 50 years ago is still relevant today. One person can make a difference in the struggle for a better world. And this is why Wallenberg is celebrated and his story is retold on this campus each year. Wallenberg's example symbolizes defiance against exposing tyranny, fortitude in defense of justice and human dignity, courage in a world that was trembling with fear, and steadfastness when the majority was apathetic and silent. It is gratifying to think that during Wallenberg's formative undergraduate years at this university, his education here helped shape the foundation for the monumental acts that followed. And thus, we regard Wallenberg as a lasting inspiration to each of us that we too can be that one person who makes a difference in building a better world. And I'll now ask President Bollinger to come here and introduce Congressman Lewis and present the medal. Thank you.
It's a very great pleasure for me to introduce John Lewis, Congressman and Chief Deputy Democratic Whip. Mr. Lewis represents the 5th Congressional District of Georgia, which includes Atlanta. He was first elected to Congress in 1986, and he ran for his 6th term. He's been in that for longer now, but he ran unopposed in 1996. He's a member of the House Ways and Means Committee and its Health and Oversight subcommittees. He's co-chair of the Congressional Urban Caucus and a member of the Congressional Black Caucus and immediate past chair of the Americans for Democratic Action. Mr. Lewis was one of 10 children of Edie and Willie May Lewis, raised on a 110-acre cotton and peanut farm 50 miles south of Montgomery, Alabama. He attended segregated schools. He and his wife, Lillian, recently celebrated their 31st wedding anniversary, She is Director of External Affairs in the Office of Research and Sponsored Programs at Clark Atlanta University. They have one son, John Miles Lewis. Sir Lewis, Congressman Lewis, was a leader in the civil rights movement in the United States. He attended his first freedom rally while a student at American Baptist Theological Seminary in Nashville, where he earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in 1961. He also earned a Bachelor of Arts degree from Fisk University in 1963. He was a leader in the nonviolent student sit-ins that led to the desegregation of Nashville. The Tennessean wrote of one of the sit-ins, "Many of the Negro students did their homework as they sat at the counters. Others read books or magazines. One, John Lewis, a ministerial student at American Baptist Seminary, worked on a sermon. He was convicted of disorderly conduct for participating in the protest, and he chose to work in the city workhouse rather than pay the $50 fine." Martin Luther King Jr. called the Nashville movement the best organized and most disciplined in the Southland. He also said, "I came to Nashville," Dr. King said, "not to bring inspiration, but to gain inspiration from the great movement that has taken place in this community." John Lewis was arrested more than 40 times and was physically attacked and seriously injured on several occasions. He was a founder of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and he chaired that from 1963 to 1966. He coordinated voter registration drives during the Mississippi Freedom Summer. He was a keynote speaker at the March on Washington, the famous March on Washington in 1963. He also led 525 marchers across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma. Alabama state troopers attacked the marchers in a confrontation that became known as Bloody Sunday. The Selma March and others led to the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Today, John Lewis is recognized as one of the big six leaders of the civil rights movements, others being Whitney Young, A. Philip Randolph, Martin Luther King Jr., James Farmer, and Roy Wilkins. He is the author of Walking with the Wind, a memoir of the movement, first-hand account of the civil rights movement, which has won many awards. In a book written about the civil rights movement, there is a quote from Mr. Lewis, which I find particularly compelling, and especially at this moment, and I would like to close with this and then present him with the Wallenberg Medal. In that book, he is quoted as saying the following: "When I was 14 years old, the Supreme Court issued its decision on school desegregation. I remember it very well. I thought that the next year I would go to a real high school, and not the kind of training school that blacks were sent to. I thought I wouldn't have to be bused 40 miles each day past white schools to maintain a system of segregation. I thought we would have new buses. But integration didn't happen when we returned in September. Nothing happened, really. I went all the way through high school and graduated in 1957 without attending a single desegregated school." In May of 1998, Representative Lewis and Representative J.C. Watts from Oklahoma caught lawmakers by surprise when they circulated a letter to all members of Congress urging a no vote on the Riggs Amendment to the Higher Education Reauthorization Act. The amendment would have prohibited federal funding to public colleges and universities with affirmative action admissions programs. Representative Lewis wrote, "This is not the time to eliminate the one tool we have, imperfect though it may be, to help level the playing field for many minority youth." The amendment was defeated by a vote of 249 to 171, and the legislation which strengthened programs for minorities and women was passed 414 to 4. On February 21st of this year, John Lewis celebrates his 60th birthday and 40 years in the civil rights movement. It is a great honor for me to present you with the Wallenberg Medal today. Thank you. It's wonderful. I guess they want you to come forward.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for that wonderful and moving introduction. Thank you, Dean Lewis. Thank you, Professor Butter. To all members of the committee, thank you for selecting me for this great honor. I'm more than grateful. I'm more than humble. I'm deeply moved tonight. Thank you so much for inviting a poor boy from rural Alabama, now in Georgia, to come to this great university, the University of Michigan. Raoul Wallenberg was an extraordinary human being. He cared deeply about liberty and freedom. He never wavered when confronted by authority. He lived and fought for a noble cause. Now more than ever, now in the early dawn of a new century, now, my friends, we need to be inspired by the raw human courage of this great man. You heard in the introduction by the president of this great university that I didn't grow up in a big city like Flint or Grand Rapids or Lansing, Chicago or New York, Atlanta or Detroit. That I grew up 50 miles from Montgomery in southeast Alabama. That my father was a sharecropper, a tenant farmer. But in 1944, when I was 4 years old, and I do remember when I was 4, my father had saved $300, and with the $300, he bought 110 acres of land. And I remember when we moved to this farm. We raised a lot of cotton, corn, lots of peanuts. If you come and visit my Washington office, Cindy Banks, who represents Michigan, she's been to my office, represent the University of Michigan. She's been to my office on many occasions. And she can tell you the first thing the staff will offer you when you come and visit a member of the Georgia delegation office, including my office. We will offer you a Coca-Cola because Atlanta is the home of Coca-Cola. And the Coca-Cola bottling company provide all members of the Georgia delegation with an adequate supply of Coca-Cola product. The next thing the staff will offer you will be some peanuts, Georgia peanuts, because the Georgia Peanut Commissioner provide all members of the Georgia delegation with an adequate supply of peanuts to make available. Now, I don't eat too many of those peanuts. I ate so many peanuts when I was growing up, I just don't want to see any more peanuts. Even when I got on a flight today to fly from Atlanta to to Detroit, the flight attendant tried to push some peanuts on me. And I said, thank you, but no thank you. Just don't want to see no more peanuts. But also on this farm, we raise a lot of hogs, a lot of cows. We raise a lot of chickens. Matter of fact, we had chicken for dinner tonight. Now I know here at the University of Michigan, this great university, you're very smart. You read all of the great books. You listen to great pieces of music. You listen to NPR. But you don't know anything about raising chickens. Let me tell you what I had to do as a young black boy growing up in rural Alabama during the 40s and the 50s. I had to take the fresh eggs, mark them with a pencil, place them under the setting hen, and wait for 3 long weeks for the little chicks to hatch. Now some smart graduate student tonight is going to say, Congressman, Lewis, John, why do you mark those fresh eggs with a pencil before you place them under the setting hen? Well, from time to time, another hen would get on that same nest, and there would be some more eggs. And you had to be able to tell the fresh eggs from the eggs that were already under the setting hen. When these little chicks were hatched, I would fool these setting hens. I would cheat on these setting hens. I raised chicken like it was my mission. It was my calling. My obligation. It was my sacred responsibility. I became a good chicken raiser. I would take these little chicks after they had hatched, give them to another hen, put them in a box with a lantern, raise them on their own, get some fresh egg, mark them with a pencil, place them under the setting hen, encourage the setting hen to stay on the nest for another 3 weeks. I kept on cheating on these setting hens. It was not the right thing to do when I look back on it. It was not the moral thing to do. It was not the most loving thing to do. It was not the most non-violent thing to do. But I kept on cheating on these setting hens. So I was never quite able to save $18.98 to order the most inexpensive hatchet from the Silton Roebuck store in Atlanta. So I kept on cheating on these setting hens. As a young child, I wanted to be a minister. One of my uncles had Santa Claus to bring me a Bible. I learned to read the Bible. Started preaching. So with the help of my brothers and sisters and a few of my first cousins from time to time, we would gather all of our chickens together in the chicken house or in the chicken yard, and we would have church. The chickens, along with my sisters and brothers, would make up the congregation, like you're gathered here tonight. And I would deliver the message. And as I started speaking and preaching, these chickens would become very quiet. When I look back on it, some of these chickens would bow their heads. Some would shake their head. They never quite said amen. But I am convinced that the great majority of these chickens tended to listen to me better than most of my colleagues listen to me today in the Congress. At least these chickens were a little more productive. They produce eggs. Growing up there in rural Alabama, in the heart of the rural South, as a young child, I saw segregation and racial discrimination. I tasted the bitter fruits of racism. I saw the signs that said white men, colored men, white women, colored women. I saw the signs that said white waiting, colored waiting. I remember in 1950, at the age of 10, going downtown to the little town of Troy, to the public library, trying to get a library card, attempted to check out a book. And I was told by the librarian that the library was for whites and not for colors. But I went back to the Pike County Public Library on July 5th, 1998 for a book signing, and they gave me a library card. So it says something about the distance we've come as a nation and as a people. In 1955, I was deeply inspired by the Montgomery bus boycott, which signaled the beginning of a nonviolent revolution where people of color will rise up and begin to destroy the barriers which have bound them since the days of slavery. Under the leadership of a young black Baptist minister, the boycott was effected in ending segregation, and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. emerged as a spokesperson for liberation, not just for blacks, but for all people. This effort provided an example for blacks throughout the South, and within a year after the Montgomery movement, 42 other local movements have been organized throughout the South to combat racial discrimination. Young blacks, seeing the black masses acting together, exercising power, and accomplishing their objective for the first time, joined the movement in large numbers in 1960. Many of us, as young students, started studying the philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence. Studying what Gandhi attempted to do in South Africa, what he accomplished in India, studying Thoreau and civil disobedience, studying Martin Luther King Jr. and the Montgomery bus boycott. We literally put our bodies on the line with the sit-ins. We'd be sitting in at a lunch counter in a restaurant, and someone would come up and put a lighted cigarette out in our hair or down our backs, or pour hot water, hot coffee, or hot chocolate on us. We did not strike back. For many of us accepted the philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence as a way of life, as a way of living. With the use of this created tactic of nonviolent direct action, places of public accommodation were desegregated in cities and towns all across the South. 1961 came the Freedom Rides, another milestone in the history of nonviolent social action in America. There were professors from this great university, the Rackham, who went on the Freedom Rides. And many students and young people from this community supported the sit-ins, the Freedom Ride, and the struggle for the right to vote. We won the right to eat in restaurants, at lunch counters. We desegregated theaters all across the South. But in many places in the 11 southern states of the old Confederacy, from Virginia to Texas, it was almost impossible for people of color to become participants in the democratic process. With this consciousness, several of the major civil rights organizations began to turn their attention to political organizing. The SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the Congress of Racial Equality, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and the National Urban League. In the early and mid-60s, there were many areas of the South where blacks constituted from 50 to 80% of the population in certain political subdivisions, but there was not a single registered black voter. The state of Mississippi in 1964 had a black voting age population of more than 450,000, and only about 16,000 blacks were registered to vote. There was one county in Alabama, Lowndes County, between Selma and Montgomery. The county was more than 80% African American, but there was not a single registered African American voter in the county. In the town of Selma, Alabama, Dallas County, Alabama, only 2.1% of blacks of voting age were registered to vote. People had to pass a so-called literacy test, interpret certain section of the Constitution of Alabama, or Georgia, or Mississippi, or the U.S. Constitution. And in my native state of Alabama, you could only attempt to register in many other counties on the first and third Mondays of each month. We organized and continue to organize. We went to Washington with the March on Washington. Dr. King gave us I Have a Dream speech. There was a great deal of hope, a great deal of optimism. Less than a month after Dr. King delivered his I Have a Dream speech, more than 250,000 of our citizens, black and white, Protestant, Catholic, and Jewish, came to Washington with a terrible bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, where 4 little girls were killed on a Sunday morning while attending Sunday school. We made a decision in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee that we would intensify efforts in Mississippi, in the Blight Belt of Alabama, to get people to register to vote. One man, one vote became our theme, became our rallying cry. We organized the Mississippi Summer Project for more than 1,000 young people, college students, teachers, lawyers, doctors, ministers, priests, rabbis, and nuns, and others came to Mississippi to work in freedom schools, preparing people to pass the so-called literacy test. The night of June 21st, 1964, 3 young men, Andy Goodman, Mickey Schwerner, Jewish, James Shaney, black, went out to investigate the burning of a black church. These 3 young men were arrested by the sheriff, taken to jail. Later that same Sunday night, they were taken from jail by the sheriff, turned over to the Klan, where they were beaten, shot, and killed. I knew these 3 young men. They didn't die in Vietnam. They didn't die in the Middle East. They didn't die in Eastern Europe. They didn't die in Africa. They didn't die in Central or South America. They died in our own country just a few short years ago for the right of all of our citizens to become participants in the democratic process. President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act the summer of 1964. He won an election in November 1964. Martin Luther King Jr. received the Nobel Peace Prize. Come back to America, hold a meeting with President Johnson and say, Mr. President, we need a strong Voting Rights Act. President Johnson told Dr. King, we don't have the votes in the Congress to get a Voting Rights Act passed. Martin Luther King Jr. was disappointed with those words. Came back to Atlanta, met with members of his own organization, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, met with those of us in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and said we would write that act. We made a decision to return to Selma. In Selma, Alabama, you had a sheriff by the name of Jim Clark, who was a very big man, who controlled the county and the city, wore a gun on one side, a nightstick on the other side, and he carried an electric cow product in his hand. And they didn't use it on cows. We were determined to win the right to vote in Selma, Alabama, not just for the people of Selma, and not just for the people of Alabama, but for the people of the South and for the nation. I can remember when it was my day to lead a group of people to the Dallas County Courthouse, the 3rd Monday, January the 18th, 1965. Just to get up the steps, inside the door, to try to pass the so-called literacy test. Sheriff Clark met me at the top of the steps and said, John Lewis, you're an outside agitator. You're the lowest form of humanity. At that time, I had all of my hair, and I was a few pounds lighter. I looked him straight in the eye and I said, Sheriff, I may be an agitator, but I'm not an outsider. I grew up only 90 miles from here. And we're going to stay here until these people are allowed to register to vote. And he said, you're under arrest. He arrested me and along with a few other people and took me to jail. A few days later, Martin Luther King Jr., Reverend Rackham from SLC and others came to Selma. We mobilized the city of Selma in such a fashion, in less than a week, we filled the city, the county jail, the local farm. Everybody just went to jail for the right to vote. Then in mid-February, in a little town called Marion, Alabama, Perry County, in the heart of the Black Belt, the home county of Mrs. Martin Luther King Jr., Mrs. Rackham, and the late Mrs. Andrew Young. Marion, Perry County. A young black man by the name of Jimmy Lee Jackson was leading a march. He was shot in the stomach by a state trooper. He died a few days later at the Good Samaritan Hospital in Selma. Because of what happened to him, we said we will march from Selma to Montgomery to dramatize to the nation and into the world that people of color wanted the right to vote. On Sunday, March 7th, about 600 of us, men, women, and a few young children, gathered at a local church, conducted a nonviolent workshop, and were preparing to march from Selma to Montgomery. On Saturday, March 6th, Governor Wallace issued a statement saying the march would not be allowed. Saturday evening, March 6th, Sheriff Clark made an appeal that all white men over the age of 21 to come down to the courthouse and be deputized, become part of his posse to stop the march. Sunday afternoon, we lined up in twos. I was wearing what would you call a backpack before it became fashionable to wear backpacks. And in this backpack, I had 2 books, an apple, an orange, toothbrush, and toothpaste. I thought we were going to be arrested and we were going to jail. I wanted to have something to read, something to eat, and since I was going to be in close quarters with my friends and neighbors, I wanted to be able to brush my teeth. We started slowly walking through the streets of Selma. A silent walk, a silent protest, no one saying a word, no singing, no talking. We got to the bridge, Edmund Pettus Bridge, crossing the Alabama River. A young man walking beside me, Jose Williams from Dr. King Organization, said to me, "John, can you swim?" I said, "No." I said, "Jose, can you swim?" And he said, "No." I said, "Well, there's too much water down there. We're not going to jump. We're not going backward. We're going forward." And we continued to walk. We came to the apex of the bridge, and down below we saw a sea of blue, Alabama State Troopers. Continued to walk. We came within hearing distance of the State Troopers, and a man identified himself and said, "I'm Major John Clyde of the Alabama State Troopers. This is an unlawful march, and it will not be allowed to continue. I give you 3 minutes to disperse and return to your church." Less than a minute and a half, he said, "Troopers, advance." And they came toward us, beating us with nightsticks, bull whips, trampling us with horses, and releasing the tear gas. I was hit in the head by a state trooper with a nightstick and had a concussion at the bridge. I think I saw death that day. To this day, I don't know how I made it back across the bridge, back through the streets of downtown Selma, back to the Brown Shaft Baby Church. But I do recall being back at the church. By this time, the church was full to capacity, and more than 2,000 people on the outside trying to get in came to protest what had happened at the bridge. And someone asked me, did I want to say something? And I stood up and said, "I don't understand it. How President Johnson can send troops to Vietnam, but cannot send troops to Selma to protect people who only desire is to register and to vote. 1 week after Bloody Sunday in Selma, Alabama, 35 years ago this spring, President Johnson spoke to a joint session of the Congress on March 15th in extraordinary fashion when he said, "I speak tonight for the dignity of man and the destiny of democracy." President Johnson went on to say, "At times, history and fate meet at a single place, shaping a turning point in man's unending search for freedom. So it was at Lexington and Concord. So it was a century ago at Appomattox. So it was last week in Selma, Alabama." And in that speech that night, President Johnson said over and over again, "And we shall overcome." I was sitting next to Martin Luther King Jr. as we listened to President Johnson. And tears came down his face, and he cried and said, "We will make it from Selma to Montgomery, and the Voting Rights Act will be passed." And he was right. The act was passed and signed into law on August 6, 1965. And since those days, because of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Fair Housing Act of 1968, and because of the involvement of hundreds, thousands, and millions of our citizens, we have witnessed in America what I like to call a nonviolent revolution. A revolution of values, a revolution of ideas. We live in a better country, and we are a better people because we are in the process of laying down the burden of race. During the 60s, we had an idea, we had a dream that somehow in some way we could build the beloved community, an all-inclusive community where we could forget about race and color and see people, as human beings, as citizens of the world, as citizens of this planet. Many of us, as I said earlier, accepted nonviolence not as a tactic, not simply as a tool, but as a way of life, as a way of living. You accept nonviolence simply as a means, as a method. It becomes like a faucet. You can turn it on and you can turn it off. You have to decide when you're going to love and when you're going to hate. The nonviolent way is a better way. It is a more excellent way. It is saying just love everybody. Love is a better way if we want to create the beloved community. We're saying in effect that means and ends are inseparable. We must continue to move down that road toward the creation of the beloved community, toward the building of a truly interracial democracy in America. We have come a distance. We have made progress, but we still have a great deal of progress to make. I tell a story in Walking with the Wind about when I was growing up outside of Troy, Alabama, in the 40s, when I was only about 6 or 7 years old. I had an aunt by the name of Seneva, Aunt Seneva. This aunt lived in what we call a shotgun house. I know here at the University of Michigan, you don't know what a shotgun house is, so don't try to fool me. But this aunt lived in a shotgun house. It had a tin roof. She didn't have a green manicured lawn. She had an old dirt yard. And every week she would get an old broom made of dogwood branches that she had tied together and sweep this dirt yard very clean. A few of my brothers and sisters, a few of my first cousins, 12 or 15 of us, were playing in this old dirt yard. For the young people, for the children, let me tell you what a shotgun house is. In a nonviolent sense, a shotgun house It's a house where you can bounce the ball through the front door and it will go out the back door. In the military sense, a shotgun house is an old house where you can fire a gun through the front door and the bullet will exit through the back door. She lived in a shotgun house with a tin roof. We are playing in this dirt yard and an unbelievable storm came up. The wind started blowing. The thunder started rolling. The lightning started flashing. And the rain started beating on this old shotgun house roof. Mom suggested that we all should get inside. She was terrified. She was the only adult around. She started crying. She thought this old house was going to blow away. And as little children, we started crying. And she suggested that we all should hold hands. And when one corner of this old house appeared to be lifting from its foundation, we would walk to that side, trying to hold down this house with all the bodies. We were little children, holding hands, walking with the wind. When the other corner appeared to be lifted, we would walk to that corner, trying to hold down this old house with all the bodies. We never left the house. Wallenberg never left the house. As citizens of this university, as citizens of this nation, as citizens of the world, we must never, ever leave the house. We must stay together. I must say our mothers, our foremothers and our forefathers just maybe came to this great country in different ships. But we're all in the same boat now. So we must create one house, one family, the American family, the American house, the world house, the world family. It's someone that told me when I was preaching to those chickens, when I was sitting in, marching, getting arrested, going to jail for a time, getting beaten, unconscious at the Greyhound bus station in Montgomery in May of 1961, a concussion at the bridge in Selma in 1965, that one day I would be standing here receiving this great honor, this medal, named in honor of this great humanitarian as a member of Congress. I would say, you're crazy. You don't know what you're talking about. But Wallenberg said to all of us, as citizens of the world, that we must never, ever give up. That we must never, ever give in. That we must stand up for what is right, for what is fair, for what is just. That we must do what we can in our own time to save this little planet we call spaceship Earth, not just for this generation, but for unborn generation. This is our sacred duty, our responsibility, our mission, and our obligation. So I say to all of you tonight, keep the faith, walk with the wind, and let the spirit of Wallenberg be your guide. Thank you very much.
questions, we have mics posted on both sides of the center aisle here. I ask that you actually go through the mic so that we all may hear your questions. And I would also ask that you state a question and be somewhat brief, or I may have to exercise the prerogative of the chair. Questions, anyone?
Good evening. It's an honor to be in the room with you. You've brought up the Environmental Justice Act again to the House, or you did last year, and I'm wondering if you did that. I'm wondering what reasons you have behind that. If it's because you view the EPA's handling of the environmental justice and executive order, if they've dropped the ball in your eye, and I'm wondering what you and other Congress people are doing to get that act approved or passed and improve the EPA's handling.
Well, for several years now, I have introduced the act, and will continue to reintroduce the act. If a piece of legislation failed to make it during Congress, then you have to start all over again. And you do it in order to try to sensitize, to help educate your colleagues, the larger community, to bring people along. I continue to say that as citizens of the world, and as American citizens, and just as human beings, we have a right to know what is in the air we breathe, what is in the food we eat, or what is in the water we drink. I don't think this whole planet is ours to waste and to hoard and to destroy. We needed to leave it a little cleaner, a little greener, and a little more peaceful than we found it. And it is my hope that one day, before I leave the Congress, that we will get it passed, and that we will have EPA and Health and Human Services and CDC and others carrying out the mandate of the act.
I listened with awe as you spoke of winning the right for people to vote. What do you think of a country now where about 50% of those eligible to vote don't vote in each election?
Well, it's frightening. It is disappointing. I just think that we got to do a much better job of making it easier and convenient. I think we've become a little too complacent as a people, as a nation, as citizens. We need to make a little noise. We need to agitate a little bit. But we got to get out there and participate. My greatest fear is that the day will come in America when we won't be counting the people that voted, we'll be counting those that didn't vote. I think it's a threat to democracy. It's a threat to a democratic form of government for people not to participate. So I think we have to be reminded, and it's not just young people, it's not just students, but a lot of us my age and people right around my age and some older that are not participating in the political process. And when you think that people died and struggled for the right to vote, I think it's a precious right, and in a democracy, I think it's one of the most powerful instruments, one of the most powerful tools that a free people can use.
Bruce Graves, in the absence of confession from an abuser, somewhere between what I call fake forgiveness and revenge, there is a never land. I wonder if you could comment a little more on the complexities of forgiveness.
Well, this may sound sort of strange and old-fashioned and out of date. I happen to believe that there's a spark of decency. Maybe there's a spark of the divine in all humankind. And as another human being, as another person, I don't have a right to abuse that spark. I don't have the right to destroy it. When I first met Bull Connor, who was a police commissioner in Birmingham, on the Freedom Ride, he sort of kidnapped a group of us one night, took us out of jail, and a group of students, and dropped us off in Clan territory like 4 o'clock in the morning outside of Birmingham on the Tennessee-Alabama line. And people say, how can you forgive Bull Connor? Some of my colleagues ask me, how can you forgive a man like George Wallace, the Sheriff Clark? Hate is too heavy a burden to bear. It would destroy you in the process of hating. And I have to think sometimes, even George Wallace, or Bull Connor, or Sheriff Clark, a member of the Klan, there was somebody's child, some innocent child, somebody's little baby. So were these people taught to hate? They get it from the environment. And if everybody just keep hating each other, well, we will have a society of haters. Someplace along the way, somebody, some group must say, enough is enough. Turn away from hate, turn away from violence, turn away from war. That love is a better way, it is a more excellent way. And I think we got to teach it, we got to live it, and we got to believe in it.
My name is Elizabeth Hinton. I'm 16. I was wondering, as a young black woman, what are some things that I can do to make a difference today in the year 2000?
Well, I think it's important as a young person to learn to study as much as you can about what I call contemporary history. I'm frightened that so many young people, African American young people, white young people, Hispanic young people, Native American young people, Asian American young people, don't know a great deal about the 60s. I hear too many young people say, nothing happened, nothing changed. And sometimes I want to say, come and walk in my shoes. Come and let me take you back to the 40s and 50s in Alabama, in Mississippi. And that another generation of young people, high school students, all of the young people that got involved in the movement, they were not at Fisk and Morehouse and Spelman, North Carolina State or Dillard or whatever. But there were plenty young children. The movement in Birmingham was a children crusade. And a lot of the young people in Selma, they were elementary and high school students, they played a role. And it would be good for young people to come together and engage in dialogue, engage in discussion about race. I think during this period, too many of us, as young people, and those of us not so young, like to run away and not engage in a dialogue. And talk about it. Talk about your feeling in an interracial fashion. And make friends and share things together. To build this sense of community, this sense of family, and learn as much as you can about what happened during the 60s, how it happened, what philosophy, how did people grow and develop. I saw young people literally grow up while they were sitting down on a lunch counter stool. So young people grew up learning about the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence in a jail cell.
Good evening, Representative Lewis. My name is William Johnson. I'm a grad student in the Department of Chemical Engineering. A brief two-part question. My representative, John Conyers, has introduced bills into Congress to advocate or provide funding for a study to see if African Americans should be given some sort of reparations for many of the injustices that have occurred to African Americans in this country in the past, slavery and so on and so forth. Do you feel that there is a need for reparations, and if so, how should they be administered? And two, with the packing of the courts by the Reagan and Bush administration by conservative justices, and also due to the fact that affirmative action is under assault has been abolished in California and Washington State, and several other states have taken measures to basically get rid of it or water it down. And even I think in Atlanta, there's some fights going on with it as well. Should we be looking for another alternative source for leveling the playing field? And if so, what sort of
Well,
strategy?
I think it's important. I understand what my colleague and friend from Detroit and Michigan is doing. John Conyers, you know, he's the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee. We come back in the majority. He would be chair of the Judiciary Committee, and we'll have a lot of influence and power there. But the makeup of this Congress, just the mindset of this Congress, if the 64 Civil Rights Act was before this Congress, I don't think it was passed. If the 65 Voting Rights Act or the 68 Fair Housing Act, it may be very hard and difficult. We have to do a lot of work, a great deal of lobbying. But I think as we move into this new century, that in a real sense, we must go back to where Martin Luther King Jr. left off in 1968 and create what I call a people's movement, a truly human rights movement. The last time I saw Dr. King alive was in Atlanta, where he was trying to organize the Poor People Campaign. It was an idea of bringing together that segment of the society that had been left out. Low-income blacks, low-income whites, Native American, Asian American, Hispanics, and others. I think if we're going to see meaningful changes in America in the years to come, it must be a coalition effort for all segments of the society that are hurting, that have been left out and left behind. In spite of all of the progress and in spite of all of the changes that we've made, we see the gap is still widening between people of a certain class, the haves and the have-not. I agree with you, we got to work on different fronts, but I think the method, the philosophy that we used during the 60s, it was like a bridge over troubled waters. And I'm afraid we're going to have some more troubled waters. And we should use the same bridge. It was good for us during those days. And the young lady earlier raised a question. I happen to believe that the vote is the most powerful, nonviolent instrument. And we're not using it. Black people are not using it. White people are not using it. Hispanics are not using it. None of us are voting in America. It's a luxury we cannot afford. Next year will be the 35th anniversary, this year, I should say, of the march from Selma to Montgomery. People gave a little blood. A housewife in Detroit, Ms. Luzo, was shot and killed on Highway 80, which is now a historic trail. The people of Michigan, the people of Detroit, should come out and vote like they never voted before, as a living memorial to Luzo, if nothing else.
Representative Lewis, my name is Eitan Johnson. I'm a senior economics major. I grew up in Washington, and my impression is that, at least from a personal level, that there's a lot of disillusionment with the American political process, and as a young person interested in public policy, seen many things that make me not want to go in that direction. And I want to know, I see political leaders who are more interested in power than productivity in terms of improving our country, and I'd like to know what it will take for us to alter that, to change our political process and to move forward such that our future political leaders will be more interested in the improvement of our nation as much as you have.
Well, I think, as I tried to say earlier, I think it's important for us all to get involved, stay involved. Don't drop out, because one candidate may not win. The best person that you thought that you voted for and supported and worked for. You don't give up. You don't give up. You don't give in. You don't give. You keep the faith, and you keep coming back over and over and over again. You have to have hope. You have to believe that change is possible, and you don't do it by dropping out. You have to stay engaged, and you have to say to yourself over and over again. People ask me, say, "Aren't you bitter?" I said, "No. I'm not going to become bitter. I'm hopeful, and I will stay hopeful." And every now and then, you have to have what I call an executive session with yourself. And speak to yourself, say, "Self, listen, I'm going to stay involved. I'm not giving up. I'm going to fight the good fight." I think we all have an obligation to play a role and do our part and do it well. That's not in the room for cynicism. That's not in the room for cashing in. In my estimation, that's a cheap way out. You don't want to go out that way. You want to be part of an effort to make the society better, to enhance the dignity and the worth of all humankind, here at home and abroad.
Thank you.
Good evening, Congressman Lewis. My name is Kim Stewart. I'm a second-year student here at the university, and I first want to applaud you for your efforts in making a more inclusive and equal society here in America. But as you said, we've come a long way, but still have yet a ways to go. And what's coming up in the Congress now is the possibility of hate crimes legislation. And I wanted to know what your views were on that legislation and where you see it heading.
Well, I've supported it, and I'm convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt, if the present leadership of the Congress would allow the legislation to come up for a vote on the House side, I think we would have the votes to pass it. I'm convinced of that. I don't think that's in the room. I've made the statement many times before that I fought too long and too hard against discrimination based on race and color, not to stand up and fight against discrimination based on religion, on gender, or sexual orientation. And I think we have to come to that point and say that's not, I think the federal government must say that's not in a room in American society for hate. And say it is a crime to go around abusing people, shooting people, killing people, desecrating places of worship, schools, other institutions, because they're connected to some racial group, some religious group, or because of someone's gender or sexual orientation. I support the legislation. I'm a co-sponsor of it.
Good evening. I just wanted to thank you for your presence tonight. My name is Cranston Norris. I'm a first-year graduate student in school education. And I just wanted to ask you, what do you see in the next 10 or 20 years as the role of African Americans in the political arena? I kind of sympathize with the comment made earlier, but I also have aspirations for making change in that area. I just wanted to kind of get your insight on that.
Well, I think African American, along with other Americans, will continue to be involved in the political arena. We will hope for continue to register and get out and vote, that we will run for office, and we will support people, good people, men and women, regardless of their race, their color, their religion, or whatever, because they support issues that we support. I don't see any, in the next 10 or 20 years, people not being elected to Congress. I don't think we're going backward. I don't want us to stand still. I want us all to go forward. And I hope and pray that we will continue to lay down the burden of race. Let me just give you an example in the state of Georgia. Just think, a few short years ago, in parts of Georgia, especially in South Georgia, because you have Atlanta and you have Georgia. Some people would say. But it was very difficult for people to register and vote in some of the counties in southwest Georgia. In the late 50s, early 60s, there were black churches that was burned because they were used at voter registration workshop. But in the last election, in 98, statewide, the state of Georgia elected a young black man as Attorney General, elected a young black man as the Labor Commissioner, and elected a young white woman as the Secretary of State in the state of Georgia. That's a great step for the state of Georgia. And the Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court in the state of Georgia is someone that's black. I said earlier in the state of Mississippi that in 1964, the state had a black voting age population of more than 450,000, and only about 14 or 16,000 were registered to vote. Today in the state of Mississippi, there are more than 300,000 black registered voters. And I believe the state of Mississippi today have the highest number of black elected officials than any state in the nation. In 1963, say in Jackson, Mississippi, the mayor had a tank that he was going to use against civil rights workers. And the mayor was Mayor Thompson. We call it Thompson Tank. But the mayor of the city of Jackson today is a young black man. So in the American South, you have this growing biracial politics where people are coming together. And I think this is going to continue to grow all across the South and around the nation. And there's a greater sense of hope, I think, a greater sense of optimism in some of these regions where things were so bad and so difficult. Because I think the power of the movement had the ability and the capacity to bring what I call the dirt and the filth from under the American rug, out of the cracks in the corner, into the light so we can deal with it. And the movement have had what I call a sort of purifying effect on the very psyche of black and white Southerners alike. And we're better people, we're different people. So that's why you have all these people moving to the South. A lot of them are returning, though.
Thank you.
Good evening. It's definitely an honor to hear from you, to hear from any of my elders, just about your experience, you sharing your love with me. My name is William Copeland. I'm originally from Detroit, but my family is from Atlanta and Mississippi. And in talking to my grandparents and parents, one of the things that they tell me, which is so different from them growing up, as for me growing up, is just the idea of community that's present down there, that you've mentioned in your speech so many times. And I was just wondering if you could give us as an audience any kind of practical tips, any kind of concrete advice for what we as young people, for what we as older people can do to, to work on living in community, or to work on spreading community or building community in the places that we live in.
When you grew up in a big city like Detroit, I have a lot of relatives in Detroit who left Alabama, and some of them are moving back to Alabama now. But growing up in a big city is different from growing up in rural Alabama. I grew up in an area called Carter's Quarters. My great-grandfather was named Frank Carter, and my grandfather was named Dane Carter, and they all grew up in this area. It was a plantation, and where I was born. And then at 4 years old, we moved about a mile away. But we had a sense of family, sense of community, extended family. You heard in the introduction, I grew up very poor, 6 brothers and 3 sisters. And I fell in love with raising those chickens. And the story I told you was a true story. It kept me busy. It taught me patience, discipline, and a sense of responsibility. But I never became bitter. I wanted to change things. I had this whole idea when I was about 7, 8 years old. I wanted to leave Alabama. Had a cousin. We were going to sow down. This won't be politically correct, at least environmental correct. But we attempted to sow down a tree, a big pine tree. And somehow we had this whole idea we were going to take this tree, the big part of the tree, and make wheels. And somehow we were going to make a bus. and we were going to roll out of Alabama. That was our whole idea. Somehow we were going to roll out of Alabama. And that was, my imagination, my dream that it was a better place. It was go to Detroit or to Buffalo, where two of my mother's brothers had gone. But somehow I came under the influence of teachers who told me to read, in this poor school, and I read everything I could. And then I heard of Dr. King, and I met him when I was 18 years old in 1958. And the movement changed my life. But more than anything else, you must never ever become bitter, never ever become hostile, and don't get lost in a sea of despair. You have to keep the faith and be willing to not be afraid to be kind and loving. I know it sounds like words and it sounds strange for a politician to talk about love, but I believe in love in action, that it is what we need in this society, a little more compassion. I'm not talking about the compassion that another person is talking about from Texas, but a sense of that we all are in this thing together, that we're one family, that we're one people, that we are tied together and we cannot escape that fight.
Thank you, sir.
One last question.
Congressman, thank you for coming. It's a pleasure to learn from you. I have a pretty tough question. I guess it's good because it's the last question. In regards to affirmative action, it's hard for anyone who is not included in the terms of affirmative action to believe in it, even if philosophically you do, when you see your friends who you think, wow, that person should have gotten in but didn't because of affirmative action. And you blame it even if it's not true. And this doesn't necessarily apply so much to me personally as to America in general. I mean, how do you convince everyone that we're all on the same boat and the rules are really equal and there is a reason for this and that this is the best way? Or do you believe it's the best way? I mean, do you have something else in mind for leveling the playing field? Because I agree with you that it's not level, but at the same time, it's very hard to say that this is our boat, but the rules aren't necessarily completely the same for everyone in it.
Well, you stated that the playing field is not level. And people been playing by a different set of rules for a long time in our country, for many, many years. We had a policy, stated or unstated, of keeping certain people out because of their color, because of their gender. That was affirmative action. It was affirming the inclusion of certain people and not the inclusion of others. So, affirmative action, in a sense, is an attempt. It may not be the best, but it's the only thing that we have at this time. It's an attempt to bring along minorities, women, and others that have been left out, that are far behind. I agree with the president that we should end it. If it needs mending, need fixing, let's fix it. But don't throw it out now. It's not the time to stand still or to slide back. We don't want to go back. We want to continue to move down that road. It may be a little painful, but progress sometimes can be painful. It can hurt a little bit. But that's the price that we have to pay for positive change. In 1955, when the buses stopped rolling in Montgomery during the bus boycott, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. tells a story of a very influential white citizen in Montgomery came to him and said, Dr. King, I want to tell you, before you came to Montgomery, our colored people were happy. They were satisfied. I know you're not saying that, but some people want us to go back to that point where everything just every man and woman for himself or herself. That people need some help. A great university like the University of Michigan, the University of Chicago, a great country like our country, a great state like the state of Georgia or whatever. If you ask the Coca-Cola company, ask Delta Airline, Coca's having some problems now, but ask them anyway. UPS and other, they would say affirmative action. Ask General Motors or Ford, they would say it's been a good thing for that company. We live in a diverse society, and we need to use everything, the best of everything. Don't leave people out because of their color. Don't leave them out because of their gender. Include everybody.
I know there are other questioners. I also know that we have approached 8:30, and there will be a reception on the second floor, and you're all invited. Let me, in closing, say, first, as an American historian, and listening to John Lewis, I'm often reminded of the fact that we all are indeed the architects of our own destiny. We can create the world that we can believe and we can imagine, and so it is our responsibility to imagine and then to create. And also, as someone old enough to have attended segregated schools in the South for most of his public school education, and young enough yet to have been on the cusp of those who desegregated the public schools, I'm also reminded of how much has changed. And so, John, for this moment, thank you for being this year's medalist. Please, I invite you all to the second floor. For those who would like their books to be purchased, and John will be signing them on the second floor in the alcove. Thank you all for attending.